In 1964, the Labour Party, led by Harold Wilson, edged into government with a majority of only 4 seats. The Conservatives, led by Prime Minister Alec Douglas Home, in electoral terms, outperformed the polls and won 304 seats. The Liberals gained seats, exceeding expectations of an underperformance. This would be the only time in an election that two parties had exceeded 300 seats at the same time. The narrow result left Wilson leading a fragile government, constantly at risk of defeat in the House of Commons. With a majority of just 4, every vote mattered, and the stability of the ministry was never guaranteed. Throughout 1965, the Labour government pursued an ambitious legislative program, focusing on economic modernization, industrial policy, and social reform, overseeing the passage of landmark bills. One famous example was the Murder Abolition of Death Penalty Act 1965, which abolished the death penalty. Another was the Race Relations Act 1965, which prohibited racial discrimination. However, governing with such a slim margin proved difficult. The defeat in the by-election of Leyton constituency, which was held by Labour in 1964, combined with internal pressures, further reduced Labour's working majority, making it increasingly challenging to pass legislation effectively. In mid 1965, Douglas Home resigned as Conservative leader. The party had shown a drift in strength in opinion polls, leaving the national picture uncertain. Edward Heath would eventually win the Conservative leadership election on the first round, as even though a second round was required, Richard Maudling versus Edward Heath, Maudling withdrew, giving him the victory. Wilson, recognizing the limitations of his position, began to consider an early return to the polls. The political climate appeared favorable. The economy showed signs of stabilization, and the opposition, led by Edward Heath, was still consolidating its leadership after succeeding Alec Douglas Home. In January 1966, a by-election was held in the constituency of Kingston-upon-Hull North. The result showed a Labour hold with an increased majority, with the Conservative vote stagnant. To Wilson, this was an indication of an increase in popular support for Labour. Seizing the chance, Wilson called a snap election, scheduled for Thursday, the 31st of March. Labour's campaign centered on stability and progress. Focusing on a slogan, "You know Labour government works," Prime Minister Harold Wilson emphasized the need for a decisive majority to continue implementing reforms, framing the election as a choice between effective government and continued parliamentary uncertainty. His messaging was disciplined and focused, reinforcing his image as a pragmatic and capable leader. Beyond slogans, Labour's manifesto set out an ambitious vision of what it described as the modernization of Britain. The party pledged to continue its national plan, aiming to strengthen economic management, boost productivity, and maintain full employment, while avoiding the boom and bust cycles that had characterized earlier years. A major priority was social reform. Labour committed to expanding the welfare state, including higher pensions, improved social security, and continued investments in the National Health Service. Education also featured prominently, with promises to expand access, reduce class sizes, and modernize schools and universities to meet the demands of a changing economy. Housing and infrastructure formed another central pillar of the program. Labour pledged a significant increase in house building, setting ambitious targets to tackle shortages, alongside large-scale urban renewal and transport improvements designed to modernize Britain's aging cities. On economic policy, the government emphasized planning and state coordination, supporting key industries while encouraging technological advancement. At the same time, it sought to balance growth with stability, presenting itself as both reformist and responsible. In foreign and defense policy, Labour advocated a more measured and strategic global role, including support for international institutions and efforts towards nuclear non-proliferation, while maintaining Britain's commitments abroad with tighter financial limits. Taken together, Labour's campaign presented a clear argument that the foundations of a new Britain had been laid since 1964, but required a stronger parliamentary majority to be fully realised. The Conservatives, under Edward Heath, campaigned on economic responsibility and criticised Labour's handling of inflation and trade deficits. However, Heath, still relatively new as party leader, struggled to match Wilson's political experience and public appeal during the campaign. The Conservative Manifesto offered a contrasting vision, placing greater emphasis on market mechanisms and reduced state intervention. The party argued that Labour's policies of economic planning and government control risked inefficiency and overreach, instead advocating for a more flexible and competitive economy driven by private enterprise. A key theme of the campaign was opposition to what Conservatives saw as excessive government spending and mismanagement. They called for tighter control of public expenditure, improved efficiency in industry, and policies designed to strengthen the pound and restore confidence in the British economy. Taxation and incentives also featured prominently. The Conservatives proposed reforms aimed at encouraging savings, investment, and productivity, arguing that economic growth should be driven by individual initiative rather than central planning. In industrial relations, the party emphasized the need to address strikes and improve cooperation between employers and trade unions, positioning itself as a party of order and stability in contrast to what it portrayed as Labour's closeness to organised labour. On foreign policy, the Conservatives remain strongly committed to Britain's traditional alliances, particularly with the United States and within NATO, while supporting closer ties with Europe. Despite a coherent policy platform, the Conservative campaign struggled to gain momentum, with Heath's leadership still in its early stages and the party finding it difficult to effectively counter Labour's narrative of steady progress. Meanwhile, the Liberal Party, led by Joe Griffin, attempted to maintain its position as a centrist alternative, though it faced increasing pressure in a contest dominated by the two major parties. The Liberal Manifesto sought to distinguish itself through a reformist and forward-looking agenda, emphasizing both economic modernization and political change. Central to its platform was support for greater integration with Europe, with the party strongly advocating British entry into the European Economic Community as a means of boosting trade and economic growth. Economically, the Liberals promoted a balance between market efficiency and social responsibility. They supported policies to encourage competition and innovation, while also advocating targeted government intervention where necessary to address inequality and regional disparities. Political reform was another defining theme. The Liberals called for changes to Britain's electoral system, including moves toward proportional representation, arguing that this existing system unfairly disadvantaged smaller parties and limited voter choice. The party also emphasized civil liberties and decentralization, proposing greater local government powers and a shift away from executive control in Westminster. In doing so, it aimed to present itself as a modern, democratic alternative to both Labour central planning and conservative traditionalism. However, despite a distinctive platform, the Liberals struggled to break through in an election increasingly framed as a binary choice between Wilson and Heath, limiting their ability to translate ideas into electoral gains. The campaign itself was notably restrained by modern standards. Unlike the highly charged elections of later decades, the 1966 contest was calm, disciplined, and largely controlled by the party's central messaging. Public meetings and speeches remained central to campaigning, though television was beginning to play an increasingly important role in shaping public perception. Newspapers, openly partisan, offered sharply contrasting portrayals of the same events, contributing to a battle of narratives rather than spectacle. While there was engagement of the crowds, heckling, and lively debate, the overall tone of the election was one of order rather than upheaval. As the campaign progressed, it became increasingly clear that the central question was not whether Labour would win, but how large its victory would be. And here are the results. Surprise, surprise, what followed was a landslide. Labour emerged with a significantly enlarged majority, gaining 47 seats and expanding their majority to 98. With 364 seats, this was a clear victory for the Labour Party. The Conservatives suffered a defeat, losing 51 seats, dropping from 304 seats in 1964 to 253 seats in this election. The Liberal Party gained a net 3 seats. In terms of the popular vote, Labour won 48.0%, its third best in history. The Conservative Party dropped to 41.9%. The Liberals, even though gaining seats, lost some ground in the popular vote, dropping from 11.2% in 1964 to just 8.5% in this election. What reforms will Labour pass in office, now with an enlarged majority? What will happen next? Find out in the sequel.
Luxury, blazing on a sunny